My husband was reading the news in our kitchen, but my pilot sister was watching him board a flight to Paris with a stranger. I had to decide if I was living with a ghost or a $47 million thief. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. My husband is reading the morning paper 10 feet away from me while my sister is watching him board a flight to Paris with another woman. That is the moment my life fractured. The kitchen clock clicked, a sharp plastic sound that felt like a gunshot in the quiet of our Manhattan apartment. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, watching Aiden sip his coffee. He looked exactly the same as he had for 7 years. The same angular jaw, the same green eyes. He was even holding that white ceramic mug I bought him for his 40th birthday, the one with "World's Most Adequate Husband" printed in black letters. Is he home right now? Kayla's voice crackled through the speaker, tight and urgent. She was calling from the cockpit of United Flight 447, her pilot's uniform probably crisp even as she delivered a blow that felt like a physical strike to my chest. I stared at the man in my living room. He turned a page of the Financial Times, his movements precise and familiar. "Yes," I managed to say. My voice sounded thin, like a wire about to snap. "He is sitting right here." Kale dropped her voice to a whisper, the sound of jet engines humming in the background. "That can't be true, Ava." I'm looking at him. He just boarded my flight in business class at JFK. He has his arm around a blonde woman. They are in seat 3B. The air in the kitchen turned cold. I gripped the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. My husband was in 2 places at once. One of them was a lie, and the other was a stranger. Aiden looked up then, pushing his reading glasses into his dark hair. He gave me that particular half smile, the one that used to make my heart skip, but now made my stomach twist into a knot. "Everything all right?" he asked, his British accent wrapped around the words with that familiar warmth I had loved for 8 years. "You look pale, darling." "Just Kale," I lied. My training as a forensic accountant kicked in, a cold shield of professional composure rising to meet the panic. 20 years of tracking missing millions and catching liars had taught me how to keep my face a mask. Pre-flight check-in. Aiden nodded absently, his attention returning to his phone. "Tahari said hello," he remarked, scrolling with his right hand while pouring more coffee with his left. "Maybe we will finally take her up on those flight benefits she is always offering." The irony was a blade. He was talking about traveling with my sister while his double was currently taxied toward a runway. I looked at the phone in my hand. Kaylee had hung up, but a notification buzzed. A photo. I didn't open it yet. I couldn't. Not with him watching me. Aiden stood up, his gray cashmere sweater fitting him perfectly. He moved toward the coffee maker for a refill. His Saturday routine was a clock. Coffee, breakfast, then his squash game at the athletic club by 11 o'clock. Every gesture was a masterpiece of mimicry. He walked to the counter, standing instead of sitting at the breakfast bar, exactly the way he always did. "I need to go," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm going to make pancakes." "Pancakes?" He raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in his eyes. "On a Tuesday? What is the occasion?" I realized my mistake. My internal timeline was spinning. To my sister, it was the start of a long-haul flight. To me, it was the moment I had to decide if the man I shared a bed with was a ghost. "Can't a wife make pancakes for her husband without a reason?" I asked. He laughed, a rich sound that echoed in the kitchen. "Of course, though you know I have squash at 11 o'clock. "Plenty of time," I said. I pulled flour, eggs, and milk from the pantry. Simple things, real things, unlike the reality of my marriage. As I cracked an egg, I thought about the last 3 months. The night he came home smelling like a perfume I didn't own. The weekend he went to Boston for a conference I couldn't find a record of online. I had dismissed them as stress. Now they were red flags in a sea of blood. I glanced at my phone. The photo from Kale was there. I shielded the screen with my body. It was a shot through an airplane window. There, in the plush seat of business class, was a man in a blue Tom Ford suit. The profile was unmistakable. The way he held his head, the curve of his jaw. He was talking animatedly to a blonde woman who looked about 25, her hand resting on his forearm with casual intimacy. I looked at the Aiden in my kitchen. He was wearing his wedding ring, the one we chose together at a small jeweler in Soho. He looked back at me and winked. "I love you," he said, stepping close to kiss my forehead. His lips were warm. "I love you too," I replied. The words felt like ash. I watched him return to his paper. Memory could be manufactured. Reality could be edited. Somewhere between Manhattan and JFK, my life had split. I picked up my phone and sent a text to my sister. "Don't let that plane take off." But I knew it was too late. The door behind me opened as Aiden headed toward the bathroom to change. I stood alone in the kitchen, the flour on my hands feeling like a shroud. I needed to know who was in my house. I needed to know where $1.3 million of our savings had gone, because if my husband was on a plane to Paris, the man in my shower was a thief. Just then, I heard the sound of the shower starting, and my phone buzzed again with a message from an unknown number. It said, "Check the briefcase." The sound of the water running in the bathroom was my countdown. I moved toward the bedroom, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Aiden's briefcase sat in its usual spot beside the dresser, the leather worn soft from years of use. It was an artifact of a life I thought I knew. I knelt beside it, my fingers trembling as I flicked the latches. They popped with a metallic snap that sounded loud enough to wake the neighbors. Inside, everything looked normal at first. A laptop, various files on investment portfolios, business cards. But my forensic brain was looking for the seams. I dug deeper, sliding my hand beneath the false bottom I knew he kept for sensitive documents. My fingers brushed paper. I pulled out an envelope. It wasn't from a bank. Inside was a pay stub made out to a man named Marcus Webb. The address was in Queens. Beneath it was an actors' union card with Marcus's face on it. It was the face of my husband. My breath hitched. But it was the notes that destroyed me. Pages and pages of handwritten instructions in a script that wasn't Aiden's. It was a character study. Ava likes her coffee with 1 sugar, no cream. She calls her sister every Tuesday and Thursday. Anniversary is October 15th. She tears up during the final scene of Casablanca every time. Our entire 7 years of marriage had been reduced to bullet points. It was a script for a performance. At the bottom of the last page, a note in a different handwriting said, 3 months maximum. Maintain cover until transfer complete. Transfer of what? I thought. I grabbed my phone and photographed every page, my hands shaking so hard I had to lean against the dresser. The water in the shower stopped. I shoved the papers back, clicked the briefcase shut, and scrambled back to the kitchen just as Marcus, the man playing my husband, walked out in a bathrobe. "You okay?" he asked, rubbing a towel over his hair. "You look like you have seen a ghost." "I'm just worried about the audit today," I said, forcing a smile. "It is a big one." He walked over and squeezed my shoulder. "You are the best in the business, Ava. Don't let them get to you." I watched him walk away. The man was a failed actor from Queens, and he was currently occupying my life for $20,000 in cash, according to a note I found tucked in the union card. I waited until he left for his squash game at 11 o'clock, watching from the window as he slung his gym bag over his shoulder and walked toward the athletic club. The moment the building door closed behind him, I moved. I grabbed my laptop and logged into our joint accounts. My fingers flew across the keys. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was a hunter. The credit card statements loaded. There it was. A charge at the Tokyo Mandarin Oriental from March 15th through 18th. Aiden had told me he was in Connecticut helping his mother. I scrolled further. $400,000 moved from our investment portfolio. $600,000 taken from the home equity line. $300,000 from our retirement accounts. $1.3 million methodically extracted while I slept next to a stranger who knew my coffee preferences. My phone rang. It was Sophia Chen, my old roommate from NYU. She specialized in private intelligence now. "Ava, you need to prepare yourself," she said without a greeting. "What I found is extensive." "Show me," I said. She sent a link to a private server. I opened it and saw video footage from my own building's lobby from last Tuesday. There was Aiden entering at 6:47 p.m. with his briefcase. It looked normal until Sophia zoomed in. "Watch his shadow," she said over the phone. The shadow flickered. It fell at the wrong angle when he passed under the chandelier. "This is deep fake technology," Sophia explained. "Someone is inserting fabricated footage into your building's security system. This isn't amateur work, Ava. This costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why would he go to these lengths?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "That is what we need to figure out," she said. "But there is more. Mrs. Patterson from 20C says she saw Aiden leaving with suitcases 3 months ago. She remembered because he helped her with groceries. He told her he was going away for a while. That was the weekend I was at a conference in Boston. I came home to find him cooking rosemary chicken. He told me he had been home all weekend. The room tilted. My husband had been replaced 3 months ago. The man I had been eating dinner with, the man who had been sleeping in my bed, was a hired double. And the real Aiden was halfway to Paris with $1.3 million and a blonde woman named Madison Vale. I accessed my professional client database next. My blood turned to ice. Logan records showed access from IP addresses in the Caymans. Sensitive financial data from 3 major corporate audits I had conducted had been downloaded. They weren't just stealing my money. They were using my reputation to commit corporate espionage. If the SEC found out, I wouldn't just be broke. I would be in prison. "I need to see everything," I told Sophia. "Every entry, every exit, every receipt." "Be careful, Ava," she warned. "Whoever is doing this has serious resources." I hung up and started a pot of coffee. I had 5 hours before Marcus came back from his squash game. I looked at the kitchen island and made a decision. I was going to serve him dinner, but first, I was going to set a trap that would burn Aiden's world to the ground. I called Grace Morrison, a former prosecutor and an old friend. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "I have a $1.3 million problem and a husband who isn't my husband." Grace arrived 20 minutes later. She looked at the evidence and whistled. "This is professional-level identity theft, Ava. But technically, everything is authorized. He used his own passwords, his own biometrics. Without proof, he wasn't there. It is your word against his." "Then I will get the proof," I said. I spent the afternoon creating a financial virus. I disguised it as routine investment documents in our shared cloud storage. The code was elegant. It was designed to activate the moment anyone accessed the accounts from an international IP address. When triggered, it would freeze every transaction and alert federal investigators. Aiden's arrogance would be his downfall. He always checked the numbers before a big move. At 5:30, I heard the key in the lock. Marcus was back. "Something smells amazing," he called out. I arranged my face into a mask of calm. I had prepared shrimp scampi. It was my grandmother's recipe. It was also a death sentence. The real Aiden had a severe shellfish allergy. He carried an EpiPen everywhere. He had been to the emergency room 3 times in 7 years. Your favorite? I said, setting the plate in front of him. Marcus looked at the dish with genuine delight. You haven't made this in ages. I watched him pick up his fork. He twirled the linguine. He brought a shrimp to his mouth and ate it. He didn't choke. His throat didn't swell. He just smiled and took another bite. This is incredible, he said. I felt a cold shiver of victory. I had my proof. Now, I just had to survive the night with a man who was failing every test, but succeeding perfectly at being a better version of my husband. I reached for my wine glass. My eyes locked on his and said, We should visit your mother this weekend. The real Aiden hated his mother. Marcus didn't hesitate. That sounds wonderful, he replied. I smiled, even as I realized my phone was recording every word from its hiding spot behind the fruit bowl. I had the actor. Now I just needed the architect. The man across the table from me continued to eat the shrimp scampi with an appetite that made my skin crawl. He was charming, he was attentive, and he was a total lie. As I watched Marcus Webb play the role of my husband, I realized how much I had missed because I wanted to believe in the perfection he was offering. The real Aiden was moody, he was messy, and he was currently a fugitive. This man was a polished upgrade, designed to keep me quiet while the bank accounts were drained. We should stay the whole weekend in Connecticut, I continued, pushing the knife in further. Help your mother with that garden project she mentioned. Marcus didn't even blink. Perfect, he said. I will call her after dinner to let her know. The real Aiden would rather have dental surgery without anesthesia than do manual labor for his mother. This man was failing the character study, but he didn't know I had the script. After dinner, we moved to the couch. We watched a movie, a comfortable routine that felt like a nightmare. Every time he shifted or reached for my hand, I had to fight the urge to scream. At 10 o'clock, I pretended to be exhausted. That audit really wore me out, I said, stretching. You work too hard, Marcus said, kissing my forehead. In the bedroom, I waited until I was sure he was deeply asleep. His breathing was even, rhythmic. The real Aiden was an insomniac who read until 2 a.m. This man slept like someone with a clear conscience. I slipped out of bed, moving with the silence of a shadow. I went back to the briefcase. I needed more. I found a hidden pocket I had missed before. Inside was a small, encrypted burner phone. I turned it on. There were only 2 contacts, M and the boss. I opened the messages with M. They were filled with photos of Aiden and Madison Vale in Paris. They were at the Hotel Lancaster. They were drinking champagne. The latest message from M said, Transfer 90% complete. Finalize Monday morning. Monday. That was tomorrow. I used the encrypted phone Sophia had given me to take photos of the screen. Then I saw a message from the boss. It read, If she gets suspicious, use the contingency. My blood ran cold. I didn't know what the contingency was, but I didn't want to find out. I slipped the burner phone back and went to the kitchen. I needed to move faster. I called Grace. She was still awake. I have the timeline, I whispered. They finalize everything tomorrow morning. I am calling my contacts at the FBI, Grace said. But Ava, you are in that apartment with a man who might be dangerous if he realizes the game is up. Can you get out? Not yet, I said. If I leave, they will know. I have to keep him here until the morning. I hung up and looked at the kitchen. My life was a crime scene. I spent the rest of the night in the guest room, claiming I didn't want to wake him with my tossing and turning. I didn't sleep. I watched the clock. The next morning, Sunday, Marcus was up early. He was whistling a tuneless song as he got ready for the gym. I have a client crisis, I told him as he headed for the door. I have to go into the office. He waved goodbye, his mind already on his own routine. I waited until his car left the garage. Then I grabbed my bag and ran. I didn't go to my office. I went to the assisted living facility in New Jersey where my mother lived. My chest felt tight the whole drive. Sunday morning calls from the facility usually meant emergencies, but I had called them. I needed to know what Aiden had done there. Nancy, the facility director, met me in the lobby. "Your mother is fine, Ava, but she has been very agitated. She insists Aiden visited her last month, but we have no record of it in the log." My mother's dementia made her unreliable, but she had moments of startling clarity. I went to her room. She grabbed my hands the moment she saw me. "That woman is lying," she hissed, pointing toward the door. "Aiden was here. He asked about your father's life insurance. He wanted to know about the Northwestern Mutual policy." My heart stopped. My father had a secret $500,000 policy that paid for her care. Only Aiden and I knew the details. "Did he ask about anything else?" I asked. "The safety deposit box," she said. "He wanted to know which bank." I told him it was the one with the coin collection. I kissed her forehead and went back to Nancy. "Check your security footage from August 15th, I said. We scrolled through the files. There he was, Aiden, walking through the front door at 2:47 p.m. He signed the visitor log. He spent 43 minutes with my mother, but when Nancy pulled the physical log, the page was blank. Someone had digitally altered the archived image of the log, but they hadn't scrubbed the raw video. Aiden had been mining my mother's memories for every cent we had. He was systematic. He was cruel. I drove back to Manhattan with the footage on my phone. I met Grace and Sophia at a diner near my apartment. "We have enough for a warrant," Grace said. "The FBI is moving tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. "But the money will be gone by then," I said. "I need to trigger the virus tonight." I went back to the apartment at 6 p.m. Marcus was there, pacing. He looked anxious. "Where have you been?" he asked. "Handling the crisis," I said. "I'm sorry. I've been thinking about our anniversary. It is 8 years since that dinner party where we met." Marcus nodded. 8 years? He repeated. We had been married for 7 years. We met 6 years before that. He didn't even know the basic timeline. "I want to have a surprise party tomorrow morning," I said, "before the markets open. Invite all your colleagues, your biggest clients, Robert Steinberg, Jennifer Wu, everyone." Marcus hesitated. "Tuesday morning? That's unusual." "It'll be memorable," I said. "Exclusive. Tell them it's important." I watched him send the invites. He was nervous, but he couldn't refuse without breaking character. Within minutes, the RSVPs started coming in. They were coming for Aiden Mercer. They were actually coming to a funeral for his career. While I made dinner, I felt a strange wave of pity for the man in the next room. Marcus Webb was a failed actor who thought he was getting a lucky break. He didn't realize he was an accessory to federal crimes. "Marcus," I said quietly as we sat down to eat. His body went rigid. "I never called Aiden by his full name," I said. "I know who you are." The silence was deafening. Marcus looked at me, and for the first time the British accent vanished. "How long?" he asked in a thick Brooklyn accent. "Since Tuesday," I said. He put his head in his hands. "I didn't know about the money, Ava. He told me you were separated. He said he needed someone to keep up appearances for business. He paid me $20,000. I needed the money. I've been waiting tables for 15 years. I don't care about your excuses," I said. "Tomorrow morning, the FBI will be here. You can either be a co-conspirator or a witness." "Witness," he said immediately. "I have everything." He made me keep recordings of our calls. For insurance. He gave me a key to a storage unit in Queens. Unit 447. The night felt like it lasted 1,000 years. Marcus stayed on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, looking like a man waiting for a firing squad. I sat in the kitchen with my laptop, watching the digital world for any sign of the real Aiden. At 5:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Kale. They got them, it read. I put her on speaker. Her voice was thick with exhaustion. The French police arrested them at Charles de Gaulle. They were trying to board a flight to Switzerland. Aiden tried to run, Ava. They tackled him in the premium lounge. Marcus closed his eyes, a shuddering breath escaping his chest. He knew how close he had come to being the one in handcuffs. Is the woman with him? I asked. Madison Vale, Cale confirmed. She is crying and claiming she knew nothing. But Aiden. He had 3 different passports on him. I hung up and looked at Marcus. The real show starts in 2 hours, I said. Get dressed. By 7:30 a.m., the doorbell started ringing. The titans of the financial world began filing into my living room. Robert Steinberg, the CEO of Steinberg Industries, looked around with a confused frown. Jennifer Wu from Phoenix Capital was checking her watch. This better be important, Aiden, Robert said, looking at Marcus. Marcus stood by the window, his face pale. He looked at me, pleading with his eyes. I stepped forward, the perfect hostess. Thank you all for coming, I said. I know the hour is strange, but you are about to witness something historic. At 7:58 a.m., the hallway filled with the sound of heavy footsteps. The doorbell rang once, a sharp, authoritative sound. Federal agents, we have a warrant. The room erupted. 6 FBI agents swept in, led by a woman with steel gray hair. Agent Sarah Brennan. We are looking for Aiden Mercer, she announced. That's me, Marcus said, his Brooklyn accent clear. But I am not him. I am Marcus Webb. I am an actor. I want to cooperate. The silence that followed was absolute. Robert Steinberg's coffee cup hit the floor, the ceramic shattering against the hardwood. What is this? Jennifer Wu demanded. Mrs. Mercer? Agent Brennan looked at me. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward the room. I had triggered the virus. In real time, we watched as accounts in the Caymans, Switzerland, and Cyprus were locked down. $47 million in stolen funds appeared on the screen, frozen in digital amber. Your husband, Agent Brennan addressed the executives, has been using his wife's forensic access to steal your corporate secrets. The man you have been meeting with for 3 months was a double. The real Aiden Mercer was just arrested in Paris. I watched the faces of the people in my living room. Shock turned to cold, calculating rage. They weren't just victims, they were witnesses. I played the recording of Cale's call from Tuesday morning. Her voice filled the room, the moment of discovery preserved in digital clarity. I set this up, I told Robert Steinberg. He counted on me not noticing. He thought I was just a wife. Robert looked at me, and for the first time in the years I had known him, there was respect in his eyes. You are more than a wife, Ava. You are a predator's worst nightmare. As the agents led Marcus away in handcuffs, he looked back at me. Unit 447, he whispered. Don't forget. I didn't. After the apartment was cleared and the statements were taken, I went to Queens. The storage unit was filled with the evidence of a life being dismantled, contracts, recordings, instructions on how to mimic my husband's every habit. But there was one thing Marcus hadn't mentioned, a small wooden box at the back of the unit. Inside was a collection of letters. They were from Aiden to Madison, dating back 5 years. This wasn't a recent affair. This was a second life that had been growing like a cancer in the dark for half of our marriage. He had been planning to replace me for years, He just waited until the balance was high enough to leave. I sat on a dusty crate in that storage unit and cried. Not for the man I lost, but for the version of myself that had been so blind. But then I stopped. I stood up and wiped my eyes. I had $47 million frozen, a career to rebuild, and a story to tell. 6 months later, the Manhattan skyline looked different. The shadows were longer, or maybe I was just seeing them more clearly. I stood in my new office in the Flatiron District. The brass nameplate on the door was simple: Chin Forensic Consulting. I specialized in a new field now: marital asset protection and identity verification. My waiting list was 3 months long. It turns out, I wasn't the only woman whose reality had been edited. Just last week, I helped a surgeon discover her husband was using deep fakes to attend medical conferences while he was actually in Miami with another family. The week before, a Broadway producer found out her spouse had 3 lookalikes maintaining alibis across the country. The trauma had become my expertise. I was finishing a report when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Kaylee. Giovanni's at 7. My treat. Giovanni's was our sanctuary. It was the only Italian food our grandmother had ever approved of. When I arrived, Kaylee was already in our corner booth with a bottle of Chianti. She stood up and hugged me, holding on a little longer than usual. "You did it," she said, pouring the wine. "The apartment is finally gone." "I handed over the keys today," I said, taking a sip. 7 years erased in an afternoon. Not erased, Ava. Transformed. We drank to that. Kale had carried the guilt of that phone call for months, convinced she had destroyed my world. I had to keep reminding her that she hadn't caused the fire. She had just pointed out the smoke. "I have something for you," she said, sliding an envelope across the table. "It arrived at my place yesterday, from Dayton, Ohio." I recognized the handwriting. Marcus Webb. I opened it slowly. "Dear Ava," it began. "I wanted to reach out now that the legal stuff is over. Thank you for not pressing extra charges. The FBI gave me probation. I am teaching acting at a community college now. I tell my students that the best performance of my life was the worst thing I ever did. Some roles aren't worth the pay." I looked at the photo he had enclosed. It was from my wedding. Aiden and I were cutting the cake, both of us laughing. We looked genuinely happy. "He seems sorry," Cale observed. "He was a victim too, in his own way," I said. "Aiden destroyed everything for money that he can't even touch now. He is facing 20 years in a federal facility." Madison turned on him the moment they hit the tarmac in New York. I tucked the photo back into the envelope. I didn't need it. I had the memory, but I also had the truth. "What's next for you?" Cale asked as the pasta arrived. "I have a new client tomorrow," I said. "A CEO who thinks her husband is using AI to fake business trips. And then Thursday, a case involving mismatched notary seals on a property in the Hamptons." "I meant for you," Cale said, "not for work." I looked out the window at the city lights. 6 months ago, I thought my life was a predictable map. Now I was single, successful, and completely uncertain about the future. "I don't know," I admitted. And for the first time in my life, that feels like freedom. I picked up my fork and started on my pasta. The world was full of lies, but I was finally living a life that was entirely mine. No scripts, no doubles, and no more looking for shadows that didn't belong. The transition from victim to specialist happened faster than I expected, but the nightmares stayed behind. Every time a floorboard creaked in my new, smaller apartment, I reached for my phone to check the security feed. I had spent 7 years believing I was the lead in a romance, only to find out I was an extra in a heist. My office in the Flatiron District became my bunker, a place where I stripped away the polished lies of other women's husbands. By Monday morning, the fallout from my anniversary party was still making waves in the financial news. Aiden's face, captured in grainy footage at Charles de Gaulle, was everywhere. He looked small, stripped of his Tom Ford suit and his arrogant British charm. Madison Vale was right there beside him, her designer makeup ruined by tears as the French police led them away in handcuffs. They had been caught at the currency exchange, trying to wash the first of the stolen millions before disappearing into Switzerland. I sat at my desk, staring at a new file, when the phone rang. It wasn't a client. It was Agent Sarah Brennan from the FBI. "Ava, we finished the initial sweep of the storage unit in Queens," she said, her voice like iron. Marcus Webb was telling the truth. "We found the hard drives. It's worse than we thought." "How much worse?" I asked, my grip tightening on a pen. "Aiden wasn't just stealing from your clients," Brennan explained. "He was selling your forensic methodology to the firms you were supposed to be auditing. He was showing them how to hide the very things you were trained to find. He turned your own brilliance into a roadmap for fraud." The air left my lungs. It wasn't just about the $1.3 million he took from our personal accounts. He had commodified my career, my reputation, and the 20 years of hard work I had put into becoming the best forensic accountant in the city. "We need you to testify at the extradition hearing next week," Brennan continued. "Aiden's defense is already trying to claim that you were a silent partner in the scheme. They're saying the financial virus you created was actually your way of cleaning the trail." I let out a sharp, cold laugh. He really is a piece of work, isn't he? He hires an actor to sleep in my bed so he can flee the country, and now I'm the mastermind. "The judge won't buy it, but we need your statement on the record," she said. I hung up the phone and looked at my computer screen. My financial virus had done its job. $47 million was still frozen in digital amber, but the damage to my soul couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the rain streak against the glass. I had spent my life looking for missing money, but I had missed the most significant theft of all, my own life. Just then, my assistant buzzed the intercom. "Ms. Chin, there's a woman here to see you. She says she's a friend of Madison Vale." The pen in my hand snapped. The woman sitting in my office was the opposite of Madison Vale. Where Madison was polished and expensive, this woman looked weathered, her eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. She introduced herself as Chloe. "I'm not here to defend her," Chloe said, her voice a low rasp. "I'm here because she's terrified. Aiden told her if she ever spoke to the authorities, the contingency would be activated." There was that word again. The contingency. "What is it?" I asked, leaning forward. Marcus Webb's notes mentioned it, but I never found out what it meant. Chloe reached into her purse and pulled out a digital recorder. Madison recorded one of their arguments in Paris. She thought it was for leverage. She didn't realize she was recording her own death warrant. I pressed play. The audio was muffled, the sound of wind on a Parisian balcony cutting through the voices. But the accent was unmistakable. It wasn't the warm British lilt Aiden used with me. It was cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of humanity. "You think this is just about $1 million, Madison?" Aiden's voice hissed. "The money is the exit strategy. The contingency is the insurance. If Ava ever realizes Marcus isn't me, the offshore accounts trigger a leak. Every audit she's done for the last decade will be flagged for irregularities that I planted. She won't just be broke. She'll be the face of the biggest financial scandal in Manhattan history." I felt the blood drain from my face. He hadn't just stolen the money. He had preemptively rigged my professional life to explode if I ever caught him. The $47 million I had frozen wasn't just his loot. It was the bait for a trap that was still waiting to spring. Why are you giving this to me? I asked Chloe. Because Aiden has people on the inside, she whispered. Madison realized too late that she was just another prop, like that actor in your apartment. She wants a deal. She'll testify against him if you can keep her out of a U.S. prison. I can't promise her that, I said, my voice steady, but I can promise her that Aiden Mercer is never going to hurt anyone again. I spent the next 48 hours buried in my old files. I wasn't looking for what he stole. I was looking for the ghost entries he had planted to frame me. It was like trying to find a needle in a needle factory. Every midnight coffee, every weekend at the office, every missed anniversary was a window he had used to edit my work. By Wednesday morning, I found it, a series of backdated entries in the Steinberg Industries audit. They were small, invisible to a standard review, but they pointed directly to my credentials. He had made it look like I was taking kickbacks to overlook their offshore holdings. I didn't call the FBI this time. I called Robert Steinberg. Robert, I said when he answered, I need you to come to my office. We didn't just catch a thief. We caught a saboteur. When he arrived, I showed him the entries. I showed him the recorded argument from Paris. I watched the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire realize that his trusted advisor had been using his company as a personal piggy bank and a weapon. What do you want me to do, Ava? He asked, his face a mask of cold fury. I don't want your money, Robert, I said. I want your legal team. I want the kind of pressure that even the SEC can't ignore. I'm going to dismantle Aiden Mercer's contingency before he has a chance to breathe. As he left, my phone buzzed with a notification from the French detention center. Aiden had been granted a phone call. He hadn't called his lawyer. He hadn't called his mother. He had called my office. I picked up the phone. The silence on the other end lasted for 5 seconds, but it felt like 5 years. You always were too smart for your own good, Ava, Aiden said. The British accent was gone. He sounded like a man who had finally stopped pretending. And you were always too arrogant to realize that smart is a weapon, I replied. I know about the contingency, Aiden. I know about the Steinberg entries. He let out a dry, rattling laugh. It doesn't matter. The moment I'm extradited, the files go public. You'll be ruined. Your firm, your reputation, your little sister's career. I'll take it all down with me. You're forgetting one thing, I said, leaning back in my chair. I'm a forensic accountant. I don't just find the fraud. I follow the intent. I have the recording of you admitting to the frame-up. I have the payroll for Marcus Webb. And as of 10 minutes ago, Robert Steinberg has authorized a full forensic audit of every deal you ever touched at his firm. You're bluffing, he hissed. Check the news, Aiden, or ask your guards. The contingency didn't explode on me. It exploded on you. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was adrenaline. I had spent months being the victim of a script I didn't write. Now I was the one holding the pen. The extradition hearing was a circus. Aiden was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hair thinning and his face sallow. He looked nothing like the man who had charmed me at a dinner party 8 years ago. Madison Vale sat in the back of the courtroom, wearing a plain gray suit, her eyes fixed on the floor. The judge, a formidable woman named Evelyn Thorne, didn't have time for Aiden's theatrics. When his lawyer tried to suggest that I was the mastermind, Thorne cut him off. Mr. Mercer, we have the testimony of Marcus Webb, who you paid to impersonate you while you fled the country, she said, her voice echoing in the chamber. We have the forensic trail of the $47 million you tried to hide in the Caymans, and we have your own voice admitting to the attempted framing of your wife. Aiden's composure finally, completely shattered. He started shouting, accusing me of cold-blooded revenge, of being a heartless machine. It took 3 bailiffs to restrain him and lead him out of the courtroom. I stood there, watching him go, and I felt nothing. No joy, no triumph, just a deep, echoing sense of relief. The man who had been the center of my universe was just a collection of bad choices and stolen lines. As the courtroom cleared, Marcus Webb approached me. He was dressed in a cheap but clean suit, looking more like himself than he ever had when he was Aiden. "I'm heading back to Ohio tonight," he said, his Brooklyn accent warm and genuine. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. I really did think I was just helping a guy through a divorce. "Go teach those kids, Marcus," I said, offering him a small, real smile. "And never take a role you can't walk away from." He nodded, shook my hand, and walked out into the Manhattan sunlight. I was the last one left in the room. I looked at the empty judge's bench and the heavy oak doors. My marriage was legally dead, my finances were being restored, and the contingency was a pile of ash. But I had one more stop to make before I could truly start over. The drive to New Jersey was quiet. The trees were full and green, a stark contrast to the gold and orange of the day I discovered the truth. I walked into my mother's room at the assisted living facility, carrying a bouquet of her favorite peonies. She looked up, her eyes clear for the first time in weeks. "Ava, you look lighter." "I am, Mom," I said, sitting beside her. "Aiden is gone. He's never coming back." "Good," she whispered, her grip on my hand surprisingly strong. "He was always looking for the cracks, that one. Your father never liked him, you know. Said he had a borrowed face." I laughed, a real belly-shaking laugh that felt like it had been trapped in my chest for years. "He was right, Mom. He was absolutely right." I spent the afternoon with her, talking about the future instead of the past. When I left, the sun was setting over the Hudson, painting the sky in shades of violet and bruised gold. I drove back to my office in the Flatiron District. I didn't go inside. I just stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the windows of Chin Forensic Consulting. I had turned my trauma into a shield for others. I had taken the poison and made a medicine. My phone buzzed. A text from Kale. "Just landed in Rome. Thinking of you. Are we still on for Giovanni's when I get back?" "Always," I typed back. I walked toward the subway, blending into the crowd of millions of people, each with their own stories and their own secrets. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't watching for shadows. I wasn't checking the visitor logs. I was just Ava Chin. I stopped at a small street vendor and bought a coffee. 1 sugar, no cream. It tasted exactly like the truth. Bitter, hot, and completely necessary. As I walked away, I caught my reflection in a shop window. My auburn hair was loose, my green eyes were steady, and for the first time in my life, I recognized the woman looking back at me. She wasn't an accountant, she wasn't a wife, and she wasn't a victim. She was free. I took a sip of my coffee and kept walking, disappearing into the heart of the city that had tried to break me and ended up making me whole. The play was over. The curtain had fallen, and I was finally, truly standing in the light. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just 1 word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes 1 word is enough to say you were here.